Um, awesome. Thanks, Joseph. As Cassie mentioned, thank you all again for being here with us today for this great alumni program. My name is Mirabella Johnson. I am a second-year transfer student here at Northwestern studying cognitive science and global health studies, and I will be moderating the conversation today. We have a great lineup of alumni speakers to share their insights with the group today. Once we hear from them, as Cassie mentioned, for about 40 or so minutes, we will take questions from the audience. So at that time, if you want to turn your mic on to ask your question, please submit the question via the public chat and I will call on you at that time. And I'll remind you of this later as well. If you'd prefer that I read your question to the panelists, send me a message privately. And without further ado, let's get started with our introductions. So the first panelist I see is Michelle. Did I say that correctly? Awesome. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure. Thank you, Mirabella. So quick introduction.
Yes, please.
Yes, I am Michelle Mills-Miles. I graduated from Northwestern with a Bachelor of Arts in Cognitive Science. So same as Mirabella. Pleasure to be here with you all today. I am currently working, so I'm representing education. I am currently Vice President of Standards Implementation and Outreach for an organization called Learning Forward. I work in professional learning, and I pretty much worked my way from being a classroom teacher to an instructional coach, and which I need to say that I absolutely loved being a classroom teacher. I know we don't hear that very often with as challenging as education has become. But I did love my experience, was in the classroom for 7 years, then became an instructional coach where I worked not only with struggling students specifically, but also then began to support other teachers as they worked with their students, and found my way to the State Department of Education here in Tennessee, the Tennessee Department of Education, where I continued working in professional learning and supporting educators, not only in a specific district, but across the state of Tennessee. And so I am in my current role continuing that work in professional learning to support educators now across the country. So look forward to your questions and just hearing from the other panelists. Thanks, Mirabella.
Thanks, Michelle. And moving on to the next panelist that I see, Mark, could you give us a brief introduction? Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mirabella. So my name is Mark Tatel, and I graduated from Northwestern with a biology degree. I'm currently the chair of the neuroscience department at Wellesley College. So Wellesley College is a small liberal arts college outside Boston, where our emphasis from faculty perspective is really on both research and teaching. So it's about a 50-50 split on research and teaching. And I first got interested in neuroscience after taking a class my junior year on neuroendocrinology, so how hormones work in the brain at Northwestern. And then really when I left Northwestern, when I graduated, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. So I'm very empathetic for any of you who are unsure about what you want to do. I took my graduation money and I bought a one-way ticket to Europe, and I bummed around Europe and then went to Israel and Egypt and West Africa, and then finally came back to Chicago. And when I was in Israel working in the chicken house on a kibbutz, I realized that I really missed learning and missed school. And so that's when I made the decision that I wanted to go back to school, but I really didn't know in what area. Came back to Chicago, got a job as a research technician at the Northwestern Medical School. And from there decided I wanted to go back to graduate school. So I actually went back to my neuroendocrinology professor, got advice from him about applying to graduate school, and then went ahead and got a PhD in neuroscience with a focus on neuroendocrinology, or how hormones work in the brain. And since then, I've been working on hormones, and either hormones in behavior or hormones in breast cancer. And now I work on estrogens and the gut microbiome and metabolism and anxiety. So my research is always focused on hormones and women's health type issues. And I really have enjoyed Wellesley College because I get to teach, and I love teaching, but I also get to do research and collaborate. And I really, one of my favorite aspects of doing research is collaborating. I've had collaborators in the United States, but also in England and Italy. And right now I'm collaborating with the team at Mayo Clinic and really enjoying that. So I think it's one aspect of research that I really have come to enjoy more and more. And this space of research and teaching combined has been a really great place for me. So I look forward to your questions as well.
Thank you so much, Mark. And JJ?
Hi there, I'm JJ Guajardo, class of 97, psychology. Yeah, I mean, my story, it's, when I went to Northwestern, and I'm not sure if this resonates with any of you or not, but I was all going to be a medical doctor. That was my goal, my dream. And then I took that class called organic chemistry, and it shattered my hopes and dreams. Yeah, I had to find something else, but I was loving my psychology classes that I was taking at the time and really felt that resonated. So I kept pursuing that. I worked in a lab for a couple of years, which is a really amazing opportunity. And as I was doing that, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after graduation, similar to Mark, like no idea. But I was a little quicker to pull the trigger on going to graduate school. So I went straight to U Chicago after that, got my PhD in developmental psych, so working with little kids. And then, as I was approaching the end of that, I was like, oh, now what am I going to do? And I happened to see an advertisement for a job at Microsoft working on Xbox games. And doing research on them. And given that I liked playing video games because I was a slacker, I thought that'd be kind of fun. And so I took on the opportunity to come out to Seattle and do research on kids playing games, basically. We were building out some processes to try to understand how we make games more fun, more interesting, more engaging. I'm not going to use the word addicting. I had to try to adapt that to working with kiddos. So I did that for a little while, and I've been at Microsoft for about 20 years now, and I've been in different parts of the company. Most recently, in the last 11 years, I've been in games. I went to different groups, Windows, Office, and went over to Europe for a couple of years and worked over there. But yeah, I'm back in games last 11 years, and I support. I basically do my job as user research. So I work with people who use our games. So I try to make them more fun and more interesting and try to understand what our customers want. I specifically support our racing games. So Forza Motorsport, Forza Horizon. So driving games, it's my jam. I'm a terrible driver on video games, but it's still a lot of fun. Yeah, so that's my story. Happy to share more about my experiences and with anyone who asks.
Thanks so much, JJ, Michelle, and Mark. Awesome. So moving into our first question, which JJ, you talked a little bit about with, your pathway changing a little bit with that course that, Orgo that didn't maybe go as well as you hoped for, which I think is an experience for a lot of students in different, realms at Northwestern. So what were some of the impactful classes or experiences for you in school, or the hiccups that you had that led you to consider and pursue your chosen industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember when I was like a freshman, right? I remember I was, pre-med, and you have to figure out a major. I'm like, well, I don't know. I didn't want to go full bio. And so I decided, someone told me, this is so stupid. Someone was like, psychology is kind of an easy major. I'm like, oh, cool, I'll take that. And so that's what I went for. And my first class was with Dr. Utah, and just absolutely loved it. Like, he was so good and just like so inspiring. And I felt like for the first time things just clicked. Like, things just weren't clicking for me in some of those other classes I was taking, but like it just made sense. I was just sort of good at it in a weird way. And so that was like, okay, I'm definitely going to go in this route. And I took a developmental psych class with him, and I remember he was showing videos. He just had a daughter, and she must be 20 something. It's crazy. And he was showing like videotapes of like his daughter doing some basic pH editing experiments and like just like failing at these various tasks. It was really fun to watch. I'm like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And I remember going home to my little hometown in Illinois, and I had a couple of nieces and nephews and doing like the same like experiments, like, holy shit, this actually works. Like, and just like getting sparked by how fun psychology was. And so that's what just pushed me in that direction. And so when I decided to not do the pre-med route anymore, while it was hard to make that decision because it was sort of the path I put for myself, it was actually an easy decision because like I'm terrible at this thing, I'm good at this thing, let's go that way, right? I'm interested in this stuff, and so going in that direction made a lot of sense for me. And how I parlay that into what I do now, I have no idea. It just sort of happened. It definitely like I kind of just went on the path and let it take me where it did. I looked at things like market research, other opportunities like that, which would have been super cool too. But this particular path, I feel like I got a little lucky in finding it. It's a very growing field. It's a bigger field than it ever was. So like at Microsoft, just an example, I think when I started, we were probably like maybe 150, 200 researchers. Now there's probably 1,000 or so at least. I mean, it's a ton of people, right? Yeah, there's a lot more opportunities than there were before. But yeah, that's kind of how I went about that path.
Awesome. Thanks, JJ. And then we'll continue to snake back through. So we'll go to Michelle now.
Yeah, I'll go next because I think I actually kind of live between JJ and Mark in a way. I actually also started out pre-med. I, however, had the dream of being a neuro. I wanted to be a brain surgeon, a neurosurgeon, and but I didn't know what I wanted to major in. So I thought about psychology because I've always been fascinated with the brain and the mind and behavior. So I was like, of course, psychology makes sense. But unlike JJ, I was not in love. I did not love the psychology courses. David Utah was great. I also had the opportunity to work with Dedra Gittner in their labs and do some wonderful research. But it just didn't feel like home. And so I was lucky enough to find cognitive science, which, was still the psychology. My specialty was cognitive psychology, but adding in the computer science, the artificial intelligence, the linguistics, the ethnography. So all those other pieces turned out to be much more of what I was exactly what I was looking for. So fell in love there. And I, oddly enough, kind of stumbled into education. I never saw education in my future. But I tell people I'm so lucky because I feel like cognitive science in a way was made just for me and my journey in education. I've been able to use, I feel like, every single bit of information that I've learned in my classroom with my students and working with the teachers that I work with in designing the learning designs for the learning courses that I'm able to design. And so it was really, I feel like JJ, very fortunate to be where I am. I have, with the exception of one job, I've loved every job that I've held. I feel like I'm making a contribution to society that's important to me, but also just personally fulfilled. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Thanks, Michelle. I love that you brought up that you ended up in education, never saw that coming in your future. A big thing I think that we emphasize with Waldron Student-Alumni, which is something I'm a part of the Student Council and just Waldron program overall, is that you're going to end up in so many different places and it's all going to eventually work out. So last but not least for this question, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. So as far as classes that I took that had an impact on me, I guess I'd have to say this neuroendocrinology class I took junior year with John Levine. He's not there anymore. He's now director of the Primate Center in Wisconsin. But it was how hormones work in the brain. And I did a paper on how hormones affect behavior. And I was just amazed that hormones could affect behavior and how we feel and how we think. And so that's actually now what I'm working on today as well. I also took a neuroethology class from Joe Takahashi, who also isn't still at Northwestern. He went on to UT Southwestern, has had this incredible research career there. But I remember doing a research paper on slavery in ants, right? Behavior in ants, and just loving that. But when I think back to teaching and so those two affected what area of research I wanted to go into. But when I think of teaching, actually, I think about, I was in the Northwestern Karate Club for 4 years. I think it might still be there. And the man who ran it, Sensei Sugiyama, actually taught me, I think, more about teaching than anyone. I mean, he really taught me, or I saw how he motivated people and how he inspired people, and that's really stuck with me. So I think it's not just academics, but also extracurriculars that we all can really benefit from.
For sure. Thanks, Mark. Kind of building off onto that educational part, how do you all feel your arts and sciences background, which I would say is a benefit for many students here, and that many students feel is a benefit to going to Northwestern. So how does that arts and sciences background in being in Weinberg, or having graduated from Weinberg, play out in your work today? So let's start with Mark this time.
Sure. I mean, you know, for me, it's sort of a direct link, right? Because I had a liberal arts education and I'm at a liberal arts college right now. Obviously, the science is sort of a more direct connection. The science classes I took have helped me today, but I am a big proponent of liberal arts education. I took a Japanese literature class that I really loved. I took philosophy classes that I loved, and I think it really broadens your thinking. I think it helps your critical thinking skills. I think for people who want to go into medicine, it makes you a more compassionate person because you know more about human experience, really. And yeah, I'm a big proponent of liberal arts education, and I encourage everyone to take advantage of it. You know, once you leave undergraduate college, you can't take that philosophy class anymore unless you go into philosophy, and you can't take those literature classes anymore, and it's a real loss, I think. So I would really encourage everyone to take advantage of it. You know, take the classes you love and that you're interested in.
Thanks, Mark. And JJ, let's move on to you.
Yeah, I mean, kind of building on what Mark said, I think just the opportunity to take all these different classes that that have sparked interest in things that I never thought I'd be interested in. And I always think about this when I meet new people. Like, interesting people have interests, right? And I like to think that I have a lot of interest too. Hopefully, I'm interesting. But that's the kind of, you know, thing that I learned at Northwestern. You know, I was you mentioned Japanese literature class, Mark. I took a Slavic literature class, and then took like 2 or 3 of them, and like, why not? I have no roots or no connection to that part of the world, but it was really cool and interesting, right? And now when I hear someone maybe part of a conversation that happens to touch on something that I might have learned, I might be able to chime in and you know, discuss something, you know, even at a superficial level. But it's kind of fun just to be able to have that connection. I took a couple art classes later in my journey at Northwestern, and I've always been, you know, interested in that kind of stuff. But more importantly, like, you know, in my job, I tend to do very, you know, I'm a researcher, but I also like to do a lot of design work, and I kind of, you know, am very interested in that part. And then other things in my life, I do a lot of design kind of things with, and I, you know, definitely picked that up along the way at Northwestern, those interests. Yeah, so it's really fun to be able to take this breadth of classes, this breadth of courses, and to Mark's point, like, this is the only time you're going to do it. Like, I mean, sure, maybe you can get a master class subscription, you know, when you're old, but like, you know, you're never really going to be able to engage in the way that you're forced to, you know, when you're taking class. But it's really a luxury that I hope everyone takes advantage of, because it's unique to that experience of undergrad at Northwestern and the College of Arts and Sciences, I think, anyway.
Thanks, JJ, for adding to that. And Michelle?
Sure, and I'll, at the risk of being redundant, I'll just echo what both Mark and JJ said, and give 2 examples, and then add, build on something Mark said. But talking about the empathy, how, you know, the arts allows you to have empathy. I took an ethnography class where I got to engage in participant ethnography, which I had never heard of before. But it gave me the opportunity to become part of the community. I chose to work at a homeless shelter for 6 weeks. And so every night, 4 to 5 nights a week, I went and spent the night at the homeless shelter at the desk. I wasn't sleeping there, but working at the desk and just really getting to know the people in that space at that time. And it just truly, you know, broadens your horizons and helps you see, you know, the similarities that we all have despite our differences. And that has made a lasting impact on me as a person. And I think outside of WCAS, I would not have had that experience. And then on the other end, I took a coding class, computer science, and took, I think it was C+ at the time. That was the big language that was out, dating myself, back in 96, 97. where I learned to think very linearly and systematically, and really learning to understand that even though I'm focused on this problem, I have to remember, the other components because they all interplay. And so, to walk away with an education like that, again, is a unique luxury, I think, that the College of Arts and Sciences allows. And then I'll just add, Mark mentioned extracurriculars, and in addition to the academics, how important those are in shaping us as people. I had the opportunity to be in a play. I participated in the Asian American hunger strike because back in in the early mid to late 90s, there was no Asian American Studies program, and a group of students organized the hunger strike. And I just am fortunate enough to have been able to be part of that. And we slept out at the Rock, for days in a row and fasted. And that was just such a tremendous experience. Again, that has just shaped my life, and being able to step in other people's shoes and kind of see the world, try at least to see the world from their perspective. And then there were volunteer opportunities out in the community in Evanston. The Evanston I Have a Dream project at the Evanston Community Center, and down in Chicago, the Bob Moses Algebra Project. Are also experiences that I think the College of Arts and Sciences are kind of really encouraged, and I was grateful to be able to participate in.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. So at this point in the conversation, we've learned a little bit about your educational history at Northwestern and beyond, and then where you're at now in your amazing careers. So I think it would be helpful for student listeners to kind of learn about some of those entry-level positions you all may have done, or those first jobs you may have had, and how those helped you prepare for your future careers, or how you personally, being a confused college grad, as many people I'm sure are worried about, how you kind of navigate those first jobs in your industries, or in adjacent industries, or maybe completely different industries than you are in today. So let's start the conversation going back to the original system with Michelle for introductions.
Sure. Somehow my first job, I ended up working in a healthcare recruiting firm. I think probably a holdover from the interest in medicine, and kind of wanting in some way to stay connected. And in that position, what I really enjoyed about that position was the opportunity to synthesize information. So I would get on the phone with people who wanted to be chief medical officers and chief information officers in hospitals and work for medical systems. And I would basically interview them and compile their information in a written biography that we would then send to different hospitals and healthcare systems to help, with the recruiting process. And I really enjoyed just getting to talk to and hear experiences from people, I've never met a chief medical officer before. So I was talking to doctors and surgeons who were looking to move into those positions. And again, talking about the power of the College of Arts and Sciences, being exposed to those different, many different people, and being encouraged to embrace those new opportunities to interact, I think really gave me kind of a comfort. Helped me be more comfortable with stepping into that space and just interacting with people in that way. And I have no idea what my next job was. For some reason, I can't remember. I think I actually went back to school at that point because this, as interesting as it was, what I learned there was the environment was pretty stressful and somewhat toxic. And I learned very quickly that this is not, I cannot thrive in an environment like this. And, I felt I'm too intelligent to be stuck in an environment that's toxic. So let me act on my gifts and strengths and make a move. So that's what I did there.
Thanks, Michelle, for sharing that. And going back to Mark now, if you're ready.
Sure, thanks. So my guess is that my job history probably isn't as interesting as Michelle and JJ's. After I graduated, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I traveled for 7 months, came back, and then I sort of started a more traditional route. I went and got a research technician job at the Northwestern Medical School with, I think I said, Dr. Kevin McKenna and Don McCrimmon, who are still there and who I still keep up with a little bit. And then from there, I decided I wanted to go to graduate school after working there for a couple of years, and then went to a PhD program. And then from there, a postdoctoral fellowship, and then started my sort of academic career of going to assistant professorship jobs. I moved around a little bit. I was at UMass, and then I was at in a visiting position. Then I was at Skidmore College in a tenure track, but then I switched to Wellesley because I really wanted to be in a place that really had a 50-50 split between research and teaching, which was what I found at Wellesley. So, but what I do want to say is I am a big proponent of after college working and really exploring the field that you might want to go into. I think you can learn a lot about it, whether it's science or really any field. I think there's a lot to be learned about before you go to graduate school, what type of program you want to go into. So I always try and encourage my students to take time off before going to graduate school or medical school or law school or whatever they want to end up doing.
Thanks, Mark. Very interesting. And JJ?
Yeah, my first job, I mean, I kind of cheated because I went to grad school. So I didn't get one right out of undergrad. So yeah, after grad school, when I took the job at Microsoft, came on as a contractor. So it was an entry-level role for sure, which meant that I wasn't an employee of Microsoft. I worked for a different company, and they basically loaned me out to Microsoft. And that was just a standard, research, specialist kind of role. Here, come do this stuff. And it was, usability engineering was the title at the time. And I had no idea what that was, to be honest with you. It was one of those situations that you apply to a thing thinking you have no chance at it, but you're like, hey, it sounds interesting, I'll try it. And then you accidentally get the job, and then you have to figure out how to do it on the fly. So, just a piece of advice, don't be afraid to try, right? Especially given the tools that you're being equipped with at Northwestern, you will absolutely be qualified for pretty much anything you can dream of. So yeah, when I took that role, they set me up in this facility, this room with, a bunch of computers and a bunch of keyboards and a bunch of equipment that I had no idea what it was. And I just sort of faked it. And I just sort of learned the job on the fly, but it wasn't that hard. Again, the tools that I was given at undergrad and grad school let me, do pretty well in that. And then, from there, I was able to, do that a couple times, that sort of role for a couple of years, and then move into a full-time role, kind of, with Microsoft specifically, and then just have, kind of taken off from there. But yeah, the first job was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. We'll figure it out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, JJ. And so with those careers and getting started in your industry, for all of you, is there any networking advice that would be helpful, specifically for your injury or for your industry, or for just, looking for jobs as a whole? So we'll go back to Michelle again.
Yeah, as far as the networking advice, I would say do it. That's it. Really, you just can't underestimate the power of relationships in life in general. But I certainly have found that I have benefited from the relationship. I've benefited professionally from the relationships that I've developed. Personally and also professionally. It can sound bad. It could sound bad, but I think in a way people learn to trust you, and they learn who you are. And so I think to view networking as getting to know people more, like at the forefront, than trying to advance your career. I think that always feels, whether it's spoken or unspoken, feels a little greasy. But to the extent that you can just allow people to see you for your authentic self and get to know people for their authentic selves, then you will land, I think, where you are supposed to land. So yeah, sorry, that was a little flighty, but that's, I think just to be sincere, do your best to get to know people, and then the right relationships, those relationships will surface themselves in time when you need it, just kind of right when you need them to.
Awesome. No, that was great. Thanks, Michelle. And Mark, any networking tips? Or, I think also sometimes students are confused on how to even get started. I think sometimes they're like, well, what is my network? So I'd love to hear from you.
Sure, thanks. I can't agree with Michelle more. I think you really said it beautifully, Michelle. I think it is about relationships and getting to know people, and I choose to network with the people who I want to hang out with, not who I think could gain me something. But I do want to give some examples, and I would encourage students to realize that I think their network is starting right now. It's really the people they're hanging out with now, and I'll give some examples because it's hard to see when you're in it. But there was a classmate of mine, Claudia Lucanetti, who I started studying with freshman year chemistry, and we were friends all through Northwestern, and now she's actually the chair of neurology at Mayo Clinic. She's the first female chair of neurology department. She oversees 5 campuses of the Mayo Clinic, and she's on the board at Mayo Clinic. So I just sort of like to brag about her because she's a alumni of all of ours, but who would have known that in freshman year when we started being friends that she would be a colleague and part of, I guess, my network. And then, through the pandemic, we started an NU Zoom, where I Zoom with about 9 people from Northwestern. And to JJ's point about, interesting people have interests. And I sort of am always amazed when I think about this group of friends who I still keep up with. And so actually very few of them are scientists. I think only one is. One is a very successful author, Dan Pink, who maybe some of your parents know, his students. He actually spoke at Northwestern's graduation a few years ago. Another is a guy, and my best friend from college is in private equity and very successful in New York. And another guy is a very successful opera singer who I was in the School of Music and is now a twice Grammy nominated singer. And one is a woman state senator from Maryland. Another is a woman literary agent in New York City who's very successful. So I think your network is starting now, and Northwestern just has so many interesting people. And so I really encourage you to stay connected with the people who you're meeting now and carry it forward and build on that network. And I think Michelle said it best, just, network, get to know the people. I believe in personal relationships, so I'm not so good about networking on through social media. I'm more about getting to know people personally, but I'm sure there's a great value in that. I'm just sort of old school in that regard. But your network is starting now, and I also encourage you to get to know your professors and reach out to them. I've talked about this one professor, John Levine, a couple times, so I still see him in meetings every year. We go out for dinner, and it's great to stay connected with him. So I think, if there are professors who are responsive to you, then really try to connect with them and stay in touch with them even after you leave Northwestern, and they'll love to hear from you after you've graduated, for sure.
I appreciate that emphasis on that face-to-face networking as well. I think sometimes we think it all has to be online in such a technologically heavy era, but a lot of those face-to-face relationships are so important too. Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
And JJ.
Yeah, I mean, not to belabor the points, so I will 100%, agree with everything that Mark and Michelle just said. I'm not going to say any more about that because they said it so well. I'm going to just add one thing though. Just in my own career, whenever I get the LinkedIn little ding dong things, I usually accept them no matter what. It's like whatever, someone needs something. I've got no problem. Like if any student, at Northwestern or Chicago would hit me up and say, hey, you got 20 minutes to chat about something? Absolutely. Like I've never said no to that. Right. I'm always happy to take, a conversation. I think I can speak for a lot of alumni who are still engaged that we're all ready and available. Right. I kind of see this as like my duty, my kind of giving back to the community, to Northwestern, because I feel like it gave me so much. It put me where I am, or helped me, on the path that I'm on, that I genuinely, I'm happy with. And so I feel like I need, I want to give back. And so taking a 20-minute, 30-minute phone call or a Zoom meeting or whatever it is, for anyone who asks for, advice or just wants to hear a story or whatever, I'm more than happy to do that. I think most alumni probably are in the same boat. So with networking, my piece of advice is don't be afraid to reach out. We're here, we're available. The worst that can happen is we ignore you, but that's probably not going to happen.
Thanks, JJ. So I think moving on to our last question before we open it up to the audience of our students is, what would you tell yourself at your undergrad self, given what you know now? So let's start with JJ.
Buy Apple stock. It's gonna be good. No, besides that, or bet on the Cubs in 2016. Besides those things, I'd say, just don't worry so much. I think we all, at least I know as an undergrad, I fretted about so many things, and I think it's just part of the journey. But it all works out, right? It all is gonna work out the way you need it to. I don't want to say have faith, believe in yourself, right? Believe in yourself and the tools that you are being equipped with in the moment, and the network that you have around you, that you will find your path. It might not seem obvious, right? It may seem obstructed by a lot of BS, but your path is there, believe me. And worrying only stresses you out more. You need to be, right? Just trust in yourself, and you will find the path that you need to be on.
That's comforting to hear. Thanks, JJ. And Mark?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I guess just to build on it, I would say be patient with yourself. And, life isn't a race. And for me, it took time to figure out what I wanted to do, but I'm glad I took that time to figure it out. And the other thing I would say, and I know that everyone sort of hears this a lot, but it's really important, that is that it's your life, and it's not your parents' life. It's not your teacher's life or other people who will sort of have voices and tug at you. I have a friend of mine who lives in Wellesley, who's a consultant for executives, and he comes in once a year to talk to my class, and he sort of talks about this topic of do what you love, but he does it through poetry. And he has my students read a Mary Oliver poem, The Journey, and it talks about all these different forces that will tug at you. And I think we've probably all experienced that. Personally, my mother wanted me to be a physician, wanted me to be a doctor, and she stayed on that road a long time, and I just had to keep telling her it was my life, and I'm glad that I did. And then when I went to grad school, my graduate advisor really wanted me to be just like him and work at a research university, but I wanted to be at a place that valued teaching as well, and I wanted to do teaching and research. And so I think those people tend to come around after time. But it's hard to deal with that, but I think it's important to remind yourself that it's your life and you need to do what you want to do. But it may take time to figure that out.
Thank you, Mark. And any final remarks, Michelle, on this question?
Sure. I loved hearing what JJ and Mark both said. I would add to that, I give this advice to my daughters: let other people tell you no. Don't count yourself out of anything, not a thing. You make them tell you no. I tell my daughters, you make them tell you that you're not good enough, but you don't tell that to yourself. And so I think, and in the event that someone does tell you, hey, you're not good enough for this job, that just means you weren't supposed to be there anyway, and that other door is waiting for you. So that's all I have to add.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, so now moving into our student questions. So students, as mentioned at the beginning of the session, you can either put them in the public chat and then I will call on you in the order that they come in, or you can send them to me privately and I will happily read them for you if that makes you more comfortable. So I'd love to start seeing some audience engagement, as I'm sure you all have questions. I know I do, so I'll let you all go first though. And if you'd rather just unmute yourself, that's fine too. Otherwise, I can get the ball rolling with questions. I always have questions. Oh, awesome. Thank you. All right. How difficult was the transition from undergrad to grad school for those of you who went to grad school?
I can chime in since it was a really fast transition. It was a 3-month break. Not too hard. I mean, by the time you're, junior, senior, you're taking those upper level courses, right? And then you move into grad school, and it's just sort of an extension of it. Now you're expected to do, research and things like that, but it's, the pressure isn't super high early on. You kind of have to start figuring out what you're doing, your first year and second year. But I found the transition relatively smooth. Again, I think if I had taken time off, I would have been in more trouble. But that I was in school mode, going straight back into grad school was pretty easy. I didn't find it that much of a big jump.
Thanks, JJ. Any other
I'll
panel?
add, yeah, Mirabella, I'll just add this. I did go back to grad school. I went back to grad school after many, many years. I didn't go back to grad school until like 2013, and I graduated, so like 18 years. Actually, I love school and love learning, so it was not hard, but I will say I lost a lot of salary between 1998 and 2013. So I wouldn't necessarily advise it, but if it must be done, then it's doable. So yeah.
I would just add, at least for PhD programs, at least in science, I think the difference and the challenge is that you have to have much more self-motivation. So for undergrad, you go to class, it's structured, you know when the test is, and you sort of have these hurdles you have to jump over. But with a PhD program in science, it's really about self-motivation and keeping your research going and keeping your long-term projects going. I like that part of it, but it is a challenge. That is the challenge. I don't think, and maybe this is what JJ was referring to also, I don't think academically it's really more challenging. In some ways it's a little bit less because Northwestern, is a rigorous place, but it's self-motive. You want to have a lot of internal drive, self-motivation to really make it in grad school.
Thanks, panelists. This next question is directed specifically to Mark and JJ. What do you see as the benefits of working in academia compared to industry? Do you wish you had chose the opposite path or a different path? So I'll leave that up to you all.
I'll take it first since I'm the one who stayed in academics, and then maybe you can give the industry side. Is that right, Jim? So I love that I stayed in academics. When I was in my postdoc, I actually looked at a job in industry, and the pay was much more than I'll ever make, and that was exciting. The thing I love about academics is I really get to choose what I do. So I get to choose my research program. With that comes responsibility of having to write grants, and that's a lot of pressure, but I think it's wonderful to be able to write a grant and, you get $1.5 million over 5 years to answer the questions that you asked, and you get to decide how to do it. Where I am, I really get to decide which classes I get to teach and how I get to teach them. So I think it's about freedom. People talk about academic freedom, and I think that's what I like most about it. But there is a difference in pay, and there is a difference in having to keep your research program going. And I do know that people who are in industry, one advantage there is that they get to do lots of different things. They get to move, for good or for bad, their jobs tend to be a little shorter cycle, and they can tend to move to different companies, and some people like that. But I like being able to establish what it is I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and it's funny. Yeah, on my end, the freedom that I felt came from choosing where I was going to be. So Mark, I think to your point, you get your freedom now, whereas back then I was like, well, I don't want to be like restricted to like 3 places in the country that I could work, and so I wanted to be able to choose, geographically and everything, and just my own experience. When I was in grad school, I was totally assuming I was going to go into research and academia. Absolutely loved it, and I think it was like maybe my third year. A couple of folks who were ahead of me were on the market, and they were really good. They were really, really good researchers with a lot of publications, far more than I know I would have had by the time I finished. And they were getting snubbed, right? They were having a really hard time finding roles, just because it's such a tight market. I mean, it's, I think there's, and Mark, you probably could speak to this well, but there's only so many opportunities available each year in academics, right? There's only so many professors that retire and so many spots that open up, right? But there's a lot more grad students than that. And so that's just a little bit of a funnel, right? And it's a little bit of a struggle. So I made the decision, probably my fourth year, I guess it was, like, all right, I'm probably going to not go into academics because I also don't think I'm good enough at it. And I'm totally fine admitting that I was probably not a good enough researcher to, or maybe didn't have the passion that I needed to have to be, a successful academic. So that's when I started looking at industry, and with that came the ability to, like I said, to go where I wanted to go, and say, okay, well, Seattle seems like a cool city, I'm going to go there, right? Or maybe the Bay Area would be interesting, or New York, whatever it was. But I ended up in Seattle because it's an awesome place, and I wouldn't have been able to get the one job at University of Washington that happened to be available sometime in the early 2000s, right? That wouldn't have been available for me. So.
Thank you, JJ. And this will be our last student question as we wrap up in the next 7 minutes. And this goes for all of our lovely panelists. So how involved in research were you all in your undergraduate years? And were there any research opportunities that were eye-opening or even life-changing for you? So whoever is ready to jump in, please feel free to do so.
I'll start. So as I mentioned earlier, I had the good fortune to work in the lab with Dr. David Utah and Dedrick Gentner in cognitive psych. Well, actually, I think it was developmental psychology. I did that for 2 to 3 years. Went up there every day and helped with a big project, ongoing project that they were working on. And the benefit of that is that I was able to, carry that experience of understanding how you go about asking a question, and then looking around to see, how can I find, where are some potential sources for the answer to this question, and then thinking through it, planning out how you'll go about trying to solve the problem. And actually, a couple of my jobs were, I think, directly connected to my ability to do independent research. So I had, carried that into my adult life and into my teaching. I would look around twice. I looked around and saw, a problem and asked myself a question, and then just went about trying to solve it on my own. So going out and reading other people's research, synthesizing it, et cetera. And actually the job at the Tennessee Department of Education, it was neck and neck with another candidate. And it was simply the fact that I had done independent research and presented independently because I thought it was interesting. That is what put me over the line. And I ended up getting that job because of that. And so despite the 15-year difference, I think it was that research opportunity at Northwestern that, again, gave me the confidence and the insight to continue that type of inquiry and thinking on my own as an adult.
So I had one research job when I was at Northwestern as an undergrad, and it was working with Dr. Margoliash, who at the time was one of the, I think, the biggest researcher at Northwestern. But our job, along with another classmate of mine, was we would isolate this protein from horse heart. So this big semi-truck would come to the basement of Hogan on its way to the zoo and would leave 100 pounds of horse heart. And my friend and I would spend a couple weeks grinding it up and extracting this one protein. It was really kind of a very gross job. But it really showed me, we didn't really have a project. We were just doing technical work. But we really, it showed me, how to work as a team and how to, sort of that science was a lot about really hard work, but but developing techniques and procedures. Back then, I don't think a lot of undergrads did projects-based science and research. I think for the better, it's really changed since then. But it was a great project, and I've never done anything that strange since then.
Yeah, and my research, I was lucky enough. So it was like my freshman year, fall quarter, and I get to campus, and I needed to get a work study job. And I was going to go like to the library and just see if I can get a job there. And I was walking through one of the buildings, and I saw this little paper with the little things hanging off about work study jobs. I was like, cool, and I grabbed it. It was working in a neuroscience lab, and so I went in there and I asked, like, yeah, sure. I'm like, all right, cool. And so like, it was that easy. Right. And so I spent like, whatever, a year and a half, like pipetting stuff. Right. And maybe cleaning out test tubes and just doing technical work. And there were students who were doing, C99 research in there and stuff, which was pretty cool. And then when I decided that, I was going to be less in the medical side of things and wanted to focus more on psychology, I went over to David Utah's lab. It was late my sophomore year. And I was like, hey, can I work here? He's like, okay. Like, it was just, again, so stupidly easy. And so I picked up some work there, and I did, a couple, whatever, quarters of C99, did my own projects. I did a summer research internship with him. I don't think I realized how lucky and how accessible it was, the professors are at Northwestern, right? I think that's one of the things, compared to like my brother specifically, who had gone to University of Illinois, and, you don't get into a lab until you're like late senior year, stellar student, and maybe you can talk to a professor, one-on-one, right? Whereas at Northwestern, it's just so much more accessible, and, the ability to interact in that way and to have those experiences was just, was absolutely phenomenal. So I did a ton of research in my time there, and it's super lucky for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, JJ. Are there any other student questions? If so, you can unmute or quickly send it in the chat. And then I'll also open up the floor once more to our panelists if you have any final thoughts or things you want to say to our students. If not, that's okay too. You all did a phenomenal job. So I personally had a great conversation with you all. So thank you so much for logging on today, everyone, from our panelists to our students. And please join me in thanking our alumni speakers for such great insights with the group today. I personally appreciated it. I can see a little bit of myself in my, what I've already experienced in each one of your stories. So I appreciate that, and you all being so descriptive. So thank you so much.